Okay, good. Cool, thanks for coming everyone. I'm a PhD student here at Southampton University, and 2 years ago I won the Green IT competition and designed a robot to clean up plastic waste from the oceans. Today I'm going to present you some work more from my PhD related topic, which is Southampton water too polluted? Modelling and monitoring metal pollution for a greener future. I'd like to just add here that even though I have done some modelling for this, my background is more environmental science, so the modelling might be more some of other people's specialities. Okay, so in this talk, we're going to have a very quick slide on how computers are used for environmental issues. These will all be things that you're all familiar with. Also, we'll have an introduction to the Hampshire and Southampton water, and we'll look at pollution sources to Southampton water. And then my PhD is mainly focused on the River Hampshire, which is a tributary to Southampton water, so therefore we'll have a case study of zinc pollution mainly from that. And in the past I talked about microplastics, and I know some of you did come to that talk. Microplastics are also a vector for heavy metals, therefore we'll briefly go over some of the microplastic data from Southampton water. And then we'll have some modelling results. A number of models being used, we'll have to go through them and see what sort of results we're getting for the Hampshire and Southampton water for that. And finally we've got a summary. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's quite a wide range of things which computers use for environmental issues. Most of these are things that of course we're all familiar with, such as mapping and modelling environmental disasters, through to determining pollution levels, predicting climate change, which certainly is of course going to become bigger in the next few years, and also marine robotics. So some of you might have seen a few years ago, David Attenborough's Great Barrier Reef programme, where he went down in submersibles. We've got all these sort of things which of course advancing our environmental knowledge. And also something I know the university is currently involved in is ship simulation stuff and potentially trying to get driverless ships in the near future. So Southampton water. Southampton water is an estuary which flows into the Solent, and the Solent is a piece of land that separates the Isle of Wight from the mainland. The Southampton water is made up of 4 main estuaries. These are the Test, the Itchen, the Hamble and Bartley water. And Southampton is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, or the UK, with many ships coming in from container port through to cruise liners. There are 5,400 pleasure boats, so your smaller sailing boats and that sort of thing within Southampton water, and 3,000 alone of these on the River Hampshire, which is a significant proportion. That is one of the biggest numbers of pleasure craft there are in this country also. Okay, so for people who don't, just so people who are not so familiar with Southampton water, if you look onto the right of Southampton, on this side we've got the River Test, and halfway up the River Test, where Ealing is, that is where Bartley water, which is a small estuary, joins Southampton water. The other, joins the River Test. The other side of Southampton, we have the River Itchen, and these join at a place known as Dockhead, and this forms Southampton water. And then down towards the mouth of Southampton water, we have the River Hampshire joining, and then just beyond the map is the Solent and the Isle of Wight. Sorry that that's not on the map, it's just that if you had that in, you couldn't see some of the bits higher up. Okay, so what are the main pollution sources of Southampton water? Well, estuaries and rivers are pollution sources in their own right. The fact that anything that flows into the estuary and the river further upstream will be moved down the river and estuary, and therefore the pollution source in its own right. Also at Fawley and Hampshire we've got the oil refineries. These could be a pollution source. In fact, that is unlikely these days, but small spillages could occur, and these could release pollutants into the environment if that is the case. And also we'll have a large number of ships going in using the refineries, and the ships are pollution sources due to the fact that they've got anodes on, which are something we'll come into more detail about later. So, and also, of course, anti-fouling paints and paints, which are also heavily contain large amounts of metals. Also, another source to Southampton water is the container port and cruise liners. In a bit more detail, we'll go into cruise liners in a bit more detail in a minute. Pleasure vessels through the anodes and anti-fouling paints, and that is what my PhD is focusing on, so we'll come into that later also. And also, in Southampton there are quite a few scrap metal yards on the edge of the estuary, and these scrap metal yards transport waste materials to China to be recycled. But it's likely that when these are on the banks, the metals will leach out of these into the estuarine and riverine environment from these sources. Another source, of course, is sewage and wastewater treatment works. So we use products such as shampoos. For example, Head and Shoulders is actually very high in zinc, and when we use them, of course, this will go down the drain and ends up in the sewage and wastewater treatment works. But these, however, cannot take out that much of metals, therefore these end up in our estuaries. Another source which is actually also surprising is roads are a major source of zinc and other metals due to the fact that tyres contain metal within them to help with their compound. And as these wear down on the road, so for example with the F1 where you get the layer of the rub on the road, as this is washed off with the rain, this washes all of those into those metals and other pollutants into the estuarine and riverine environment. Something that I thought was quite interesting is Southampton, being a big cruise liner port, currently doesn't have any, from what I'm aware, doesn't have any external power supplies for the vessel to plug into when they're in dock. And this is quite unique in the fact that most ports that have these many cruise liners do have that. So this means that when the cruise lines are in port, they have to continually have their exhaust running, which is a big pollution source, which adds to the air pollution in Southampton. And Southampton dock currently has, from what also I'm aware, doesn't have any monitoring for this air pollution. And it's predicted that 7 to 23% of the air pollution within Southampton is coming from Southampton dock itself, with cars making up 18% of this, heavy goods vehicles 12% of this, and then the rest of the percentages will be from other smaller sources such as individual people's fires, etc. One of the main pollution sources from cruise liners is sulfur dioxide, which causes emission from the exhausts. Metals also precipitate out and be present in the estuary from these sources, once again from anti-fouling paints and anodes, etc. And also waste items tend to be lost overboard, which is also a further pollution source from this sort of vessel. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm doing a PhD here at Southampton, and this PhD is focused on the Hampshire estuary, which, as we saw, is an estuary that joins Southampton water. And my PhD is looking at zinc pollution or zinc concentration in the Hampshire from pleasure vessels. So this project came about due to the fact that anecdotal evidence suggested that boat owners in the Hampshire thought that their zinc sacrificial anodes were decaying quicker than elsewhere, and we wanted to determine if this was the case or not and what could be done about this. And also, all metals and pollutants in estuarine and riverine environments have environmental quality standards set for them, and the one for zinc is 7.9 microgram per litre. So we want to see if anodes were causing the 7.9 microgram per litre EQS to be exceeded within the Hampshire. And to try and validate these results, a wide range of a number of models were used. We want to see if we could predict or and validate the result we're seeing in the estuary, to determine if anodes, for example, were the major source of zinc to the estuarine environment. Okay, so I know we have gone over these for Southampton water, where we now focus slightly on Southampton, or also on Hampshire. There are 3 sewage and wastewater treatment works on Hampshire. 2 of these are in the tidal section of Botley and Bursledon, and we have a 3rd one at Bishop's Waltham in the freshwater section. As I mentioned, we have 3,000 vessels in the Hampshire, and we've got with tyres being a source, we've got the A27 bridge and the M27 bridge, and quite surprisingly, the M27 motorway bridge, the runoff from this bridge goes directly into the river. So there's a pipe that flows in. When it's raining, if you go underneath the bridge, you've got to watch out going underneath in your boat because you can get very wet otherwise. And once again, riverine input. And also, another quite interesting source in the Hampshire is this is research that's being done by Paul Wright at this university, many of you might know. They've taken sediment samples at Warsash, where there's historic foundries and smelting works, and the zinc levels and the metal levels here are extortionate, and we'll see some results from that later. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what sacrificial anodes are, sacrificial anodes are essentially a piece of metal which connects to the cathode, which is the boat's hull or propeller, and protects it from corrosion. So the anode corrodes, and in the process protects the hull from corrosion. This is done by selecting a metal which is low in what's called the galvanic series, and metals low in the galvanic series will always protect the one above it in the series. So zinc is used in seawater, aluminium is used in brackish and can also be used in seawater, and magnesium is used in freshwater. At the current time, aluminium is rarely used though, due to the fact that boat owners have always used zinc in the past, and therefore do still tend to use zinc. 99% of an anode is made of zinc, or a zinc anode is made of zinc, so therefore if these anodes corrode, these are releasing significant proportions of zinc to the estuarine environment. And it's recommended that anodes are replaced annually by manufacturers, and this typically shows 50% loss. So for example, an anode is, typical weight of anodes are 1 to 2 kilograms, so if 50% of that is losing, that shows how much zinc is being released from one boat each year, considering one boat might have 1 to 3 anodes on it. Okay, so just a bit more detail about cathode protection. So for cathode protection to work, the anode and the cathode have to be either in physical contact or connected via a wire, as the diagram on the left indicates. And if this is the case, an electrochemical cell is formed between the anode and the cathode, and the anode can corrode. This study, and also a study in the Plymouth area, has shown that on average vessels have 3 anodes on them. So as we're going back to what we're saying about how much is corroding, that indicates just how much is going from anodes. Anodes are generally imposed on what is known as a 2-anode system on the hull, and the 3rd anode on the propeller shaft and the prop at the stern of the vessel. But some boats, depending on their length and what the size of the vessel is and what you need protecting, can have as many as 4, 6 or 8 anodes on the hull. Okay, so we wanted to determine if zinc anodes were the major source of zinc to the Hampshire estuarine environment, and then this allowed us to do some modelling, which we'll see the results for later. So from a survey that I sent out to boat owners, on the handball, we determined a release rate for the handball of 2.49 kilograms per year, and then from this we worked out a release rate then using the number of vessels, which is 3,000, and also done a number of experiments within this study with laboratory experiments on anode decay rates and also in situ experiments in the estuary, and we found out that this release rate predicted by the boat owners is actually very accurate. So 56% of their anodes is decaying each year, and this is what we've seen in experiments we've done in the estuary. And in the middle comes a graph which shows the main sources of zinc. Also, I've done a calculation for the discharge from 3 sewage work we've seen. We've also done calculation for anti-fouling paints, the riverine input, and also calculations for the road runoff. And this graph here, a lot of it shows that 6.95 tonnes a year of zinc is released from anodes each year into the Hampshire estuary alone for the 3,000 vessels, which is something that in the past anodes have been overlooked because many estuaries have very few anodes, very few vessels on them, and when they do have a lot of vessels, they're generally quite big estuaries. But the Hampshire estuary is quite a small, compact estuary. So from the mouth up to Belgium, for example, is only 3 kilometres or 3 or 4 miles. Therefore, and all those boats are crammed in that small section, and normally they're spread out over the whole sort of maybe 20, 30 kilometres of an estuary. Therefore, on the handball, you notice the effect more than you would in other estuaries. And then if we compare this to the zinc concentration we're getting from other sources, for most estuaries, sewage works are one of the biggest sources, but on the handball, we're only getting 0.15 tonnes a year, which is a very insignificant number to what we're seeing for anodes. Also, anti-fouling paints being mainly copper-based, we're only looking at getting around 0.022 tonnes a year. The riverine input, we're looking at 0.12 tonnes, and road runoff from the tyres, etc., 0.032 tonnes. So we can see the major source of zinc to the Hampshire estuarine environment is from anodes by a significant proportion. And this sort of tallies with what we're seeing zinc concentration in the estuary. This graph here shows zinc concentrations. So we've got the orange bars, which are the total dissolved zinc, and the blue bars, which are lay-bar zinc. Lay-bar zinc is a bioavailable zinc. This is zinc which is generally more toxic to marine life and is generally half to 2/3 of the total dissolved zinc. The grey line is a 7.9 microgram per litre E2S, the environmental quality standard for zinc from the marine environment. And the salinity is the orange line. So you can see, generally zinc concentration increases with lower salinities. C1 and C2 are 2 control sites within Southampton water, and number 10 is as water sample just inside the mouth of the hamlet of Warsash. Number 1 is at Burlington, and 1A and 1B just above the boats. So you can see, generally, as you go upriver towards Burlington, which is around UM1, SM1, 2 and 3, we can see that generally we've got higher zinc concentrations in this area, And this is the area where we've got higher boat densities. This is supporting what we're seeing is that anodes are the biggest source of zinc to the Hampshire estuarine environment. And as we can also see, the environmental quality standard for zinc is not being met for the estuary, especially in the upper reaches of the estuary in areas of high boat density. If we go upstream, some of these graphs might be hard to see with the lines, I'm afraid. If you go upstream, the graph on your left has the same equivalent site, 10, 5 and 3, so you can see 3 is above the UQS. If we go upstream, 1A and 1B are still high, and these influence on the boats. And then 1D is largely accepted in the sewage plume at Botley. I'd like to add, I didn't actually collect that sample that day. One of my friends did, so I was glad that I wasn't collecting that from my hands in the sewage water. Didn't actually realise that at the time. But then if we go upstream, you can see 1F and 1G. These are up at the tidal limits of the estuary, of the Hampshire estuary and the two tributaries, and these are below the EQS. So this shows that the major source of zinc are coming into the Hampshire actually within the estuary itself. And this is also supported by the graph on the right, which have 2 freshwater samples for the Hampshire, which were again to resolve zinc levels of 2 to 3 micrograms per litre. So, as I said before, higher total resolved zinc concentrations are generally found in areas of higher boat density. And this graph here has divided the estuary up into 1 kilometre sections, and we have averaged the total resolved zinc concentration for those 1 kilometre sections and plotted the boat density against it. And if you look at the graph, it's slightly offset with the tide due to the fact that the water samples were detected on a rising tide. But as you can see, generally, areas of high boat density do tend to have higher total zinc concentrations. And once again, in the upper estuary, the average for this is exceeding the marine environment quality standard of 7.9 micrograms per litre. And also, the Hampshire is quite unique in the fact it does have 3,000 vessels, therefore we're likely to see higher zinc levels due to that. Okay, so this talk isn't just focusing on the Hampshire as such. So these are water samples from Southampton water, and the Hampshire shows trends for zinc anodes being the major source. But if we look at samples on Tesnitchen, this shows some other sources coming into light. I1 shows the far left point, that is taken within Ocean Village Marine on the River Itchen, therefore this is likely due to be high due to the fact of zinc anodes. If we look at I4, this is taken at Northern, where we're just off one of those scrap metal yards I mentioned, therefore it's likely that these are influenced and slightly higher due to the scrap metal yard and leaching metals. T1 and T2 on the test are likely to be influenced by the levels from like the cruise ship, container port, etc. As you can see though, the test and the Itchen are also failing EQS, so therefore we should ask really how realistic this EQS is, because if all estuaries are failing it, is the standard set too low? And it's likely that is in many cases. Okay, so it's not just the water column that is polluted. The sediments also show pollution. So these are the same equivalent sites. The graph on the left is the zinc graph, and for sediments, the UK doesn't actually have any standards like we do for the water column. So in the UK and worldwide, in environmental science, at the moment, Canadian standards are used for sediments if we use a standard, and this is actually one of the few countries that actually has set standards at the moment. And we have an interim level, which is where anything above this is likely to have some impact on marine life, then a probable level, and anything above that probable level is highly likely to have an impact on marine life. And if you look at the zinc for the Hampshire, it is consistently below this line, so it's on the border of potentially having an impact on marine life. And then, more alarmingly, if you look at cadmium, for example, cadmium, where it's present in the estuary, in the Hampshire, is consistently above the line quite significantly, so therefore this could be a potential harm to marine life. And quite surprisingly, cadmium is present in all zinc anodes in very small quantities to help with the alloy, form an alloy, which creates a better rate, which is actually also quite alarming due to the fact that you wouldn't expect cadmium to be so widely used in this sort of time period. And also, so the graph on the left is copper, and as you can see with copper, anti-fouling paints are quite a big source of this. But as you can see, this is quite consistently below the 2 standards, and final graph is lead, and as you can see, this is between the two standards, but if it does exceed it by high levels. So as you can see, the sediments of Southampton water are, or the handle are contaminated, and it's not just a water column. Earlier, I mentioned to you all about a study that was done by Paul Wright at this university on the Hampshire Watersash foreshore, where we had former smelting works. And number one is, on the graph, is taken at Watersash off the sailing club, so actually within Watersash village. And then the far side, 48, is taken at the mouth of the handle off the spit. So therefore, it's an area probably about half a mile we're looking at. And then where the Southampton University campus is, there's a pier, and the high zinc sample was collected off that pier, and that is where, in the past, all the smelting waste was dumped on the estuary foreshore here to build the foreshore up. And this meant that there's very high zinc and metal levels in the sediments here. So if we look at the graph, for example, we're getting zinc levels as high as 3,500, 4,000 micrograms per gram, and the highest zinc level, it should be 2,070 micrograms. So therefore, as you can see, we're getting significantly raised zinc levels well above the indicated standards. So therefore, it's likely here that any marine life could be potentially stunted, or it would be surprising if there's actually any marine life in that vicinity due to the fact that we're seeing that high zinc levels. And as a comparison, the green mark by number one is my same equivalent sample in the mid-channel when I collected mine. So you can see the mid-channel of the estuary is not actually affected, so therefore this pollution is very, very localised to a small area on the foreshore. So another comparison, these are the same, these are sediment concentrations for zinc and copper from the Tessenitchen. So as you can see, the Tessenitchen is also consistently within the two standards for sediments like the Hamble. Okay, so where does the Hamble fit in compared to other estuaries? So the Hamble is actually quite a small estuary compared to many estuaries, and also doesn't actually have many sources to it. So if we look at this graph, we can see that the Hamble average here is consistently below within the line. But if we look at some of the other estuaries, some are below the line and others are above that line. But if we look at the other estuaries that are above, they're generally within Devon and Cornwall or former industrialised areas. So we've got the Fowl and Hereford in Cornwall, which are former mining areas, therefore they have got a large metal concentrations, and also the Tyne. And if we look at areas which are below, interestingly Southampton and the Tess in environmental data is below, but this is due to the fact that these are collected in heavily dredged areas, therefore most sediments that we're seeing there are constantly changing and actually haven't got historic metal contamination. But then a lot of estuaries, such as the Orwell and Morecambe Bay, which are quite big estuaries, do tend to have lower metal concentrations. And this is a similar graph to what we've just seen, but this is data from the literature. So we can see in the literature, Hamble is considered quite low compared to a lot of the other estuaries from metal concentrations. As for example, the Tor and, I don't think I'm saying this right, but the Redrejont or something in Cornwall have very, very high metal concentrations, and some of the levels we're seeing here are higher than the highest we saw at that polluted site within the Hamble. Okay, so from this, this is sort of like an interim conclusion. What conclusion can we draw? Is Southampton water polluted? Well, yeah, if we compare it to the environmental quality standard, to the marine environmental quality standard 7.9 micrograms per zinc, it is saying it is polluted. But then the level we're seeing in the water column aren't actually going to have any significant impact on marine life. So how realistic is it that this decompressor is going to cause any problems? And also, if we look at the sediments, then yes, they're within the two standards, so technically they are polluted. But once again, the pollution levels aren't as high as some estuaries, so therefore the level we're looking at probably aren't going to cause too many issues. But where we do have those high levels, it's generally more localised to small areas within the Hamble of Southampton water. Okay, so I know some of you have seen the talk I've done on microplastics and marine litter in the past. So Southampton water isn't just polluted with metal pollution, it's also polluted with microplastics. So microplastics are pieces of plastic under 5 millimetres in size, and quite a few recent studies have indicated that heavy metals and other pollutants can absorb to microplastics and then be transported around on the tide and things, so therefore they're vectors for heavy metals. Microplastics mainly come from sources such as clothes washing, beauty and cleaning products with microbeads, and the breakdown of larger items. Currently, at the moment, there are not enough data to do modelling for microplastics, but I think it's still something that people will start doing in the future as more data sets come in. And nurdles are also present. Nurdles are little plastic beads, which are the top image, which are melted down to make larger plastic items such as polythene sheeting, etc. So within Southampton water, 4 plankton trawls are done in each of the estuaries, and the handball test each in the Southampton water. And these were carried out with a trawl 5 minutes downstream and a trawl 5 minutes upstream. So a very small section of the estuary was sampled in this. And a total of 2,759 microplastic particles were found within the trawls in all rivers, with the most being found on the River Itchen with 1,155, and then even the Hamble 296. The Hamble is quite a small rural river, therefore got less sources, and of course the Itchen is right by Southampton to have more from sewage works, etc. And the most common particles found were fibres and round beads from cleaning and beauty products, and these came in a wide range of shapes and colours. And the images below are actually images from within this study. So we can see we've got like irregular blue, we've got fibres. So this shows that there's a wide range of microplastics out of the water which could also be contaminated with these metals, which are then transported elsewhere. And on the River Itchen, we also have a large quantity of these what are called nurdles and microbeads. Like I said, these are 5 millimetres in size and are melted down to make large plastic items. There's a company that uses these to make polythene sheeting on the banks of the River Itchen, and these things are so small that they're very easy for them to be blown out and lost. And the Itchen often has a large number of these along their banks. A few weeks ago, I took part in the Great European Nurdle Hunt, which is where they're encouraging people, odd name or no, where they're encouraging people to go round to their local beach or estuary and pick up many of these that they can in different time periods. In 25 minutes, I picked up 714 of these on Cheddar Bay Nature Reserve, which is halfway up the River Itchen. So this sort of shows what problem this is in the local area. This is not just a problem here, it's a problem in many beaches, lakes and estuarine environments worldwide. And the image at the bottom was taken in 2015 at the University Spoke, so it's there. And as you can see by the fender, if you look carefully, you can see that what we're looking at isn't actually the water column, it's actually hundreds and hundreds of these nurdles floating on the top of the water. And at certain periods in the River Itchen, it's literally covered in these, where there's been quite a big spillage of these in the estuary. Okay, so we'll now come on to some of the modelling results. So the modelling was done to validate some of the data that we're seeing within the estuary, see if with the source that we think from our calculations are the largest sources of zinc to the estuarine environment. So the number of models are used for this: the Manpack model, the Sagis model, the BLM Biomet model, the GEMCO model, and the Visual Minitech model, and we'll come into each of these in a bit of detail. So the Manpack model is a model that's been designed by a big marine consulting company in Holland called Dalteres, and they've designed this model to model biocides and metal contamination coming from paints, so such as copper and Gal 1051. This model hasn't actually been widely adapted so far for anodes, but in this study Plymouth had, in this study we've adapted the model, put a simple box model to calculate the amount of zinc coming from anodes in the estuarine environment. Okay, so the model looks like this, is a simple box model. So you put in your inputs such as pH, temperature, salinity, the width, length and depth of the marina, and then from that you can then calculate the zinc concentration which is eventually coming from each marina. So if we look at the results, we use a background concentration of 7.7 microgram per litre, and for the marinas and the Hamble, it gave us estimates of 7.7 to 8.15 microgram per litre for the zinc level. So you can see this is below the levels that we're seeing in the estuary in some cases. So at the mouth, for example, we got a total result average of 6.86 microgram per litre at Hamble Point Marina, and we're getting an output of 7.7 from the model. And in areas upstream, we're getting an average of 12.3 and an output of the model of 7.91. So therefore, this shows that in areas of high boat density, the model is currently predicting too low. Therefore, further work needs to be done on this. But with this model, it's likely that the model, you only put details in for certain marinas, but hence that upstream, the estuary is essentially one large marina. You're not taking into account the effects of the other marinas and the water washing through them. So as I said, further work needed on that. to get a proper output from this. Another model that has been used in a limited amount in this study is the SAGIS source supported GIS model. This model is a model which gives you very nice output, but what it does is it models the main sources into the estuary environment. So you put in sort of, you tell the estuary, the length of the estuary, etc., and what the sources are you want to go into the estuary, and it will then model them and give you an output graph or map like this. This model was designed for lake environments and has been used very limitedly in rivers and estuaries so far. And where it has been used in rivers and estuaries, it's been limited to quite large areas. So, for example, they mapped the whole of Cornwall and Devon and not actually individual estuaries. So we thought it was quite a good opportunity to model the local, more smaller sort of estuary with this model. But sadly, due to the fact that anodes are such a big source of the handball, this model predicted very, very low zinc levels. And the reason for this is because the algorithm for anodes in the past have been set quite low due to the fact that anodes have been a very small source to most estuaries. But as we found out with handball, this algorithm needs to be adjusted so we can get a proper output. Something I found out with models is, as fun as they are, you often do find that you do get sometimes variable results. Further work needs to do this. In the past, it hasn't been an issue though, due to the fact that anodes are generally a small source of estuary. So most other places it has been tried in, we have got good results for this model, but that's because mainly those areas like mining, etc., is the biggest source. So another model is called the BLM Biomet model. This model is basic Excel-based model, like the diagram shows, and this is where it gets slightly confusing with environmental quality standards. In the marine environment, we have a set level for environmental quality standards, which anything above it exceeds. But in the freshwater environment, don't ask me why this is the case. The level is calculated based on the geology, etc. So the dissolved organic carbon, the calcium, and the pH, and therefore this level can vary. And therefore, often the freshwater environment can be meeting the EQS for the freshwater environment, but then when it reaches the estuarine environment, it can be failing EQS, and we'll see why that is in a minute. So, for example, using the parameters of DOC, pH, and calcium for the handball, we've got zinc, a local zinc EQS of 19 up to 30 microgram per litre, and we're seeing zinc concentrations of 15 to 5 microgram per litre, so it's 5 to 15 microgram per litre. So as you can see, these are meeting the EQSs that are set for the local freshwater environment, but then when these come into the estuarine environment and mix with the tidal waters, they are not diluted significantly, they're already failing the zinc marine environment EQS. This is something that I think needs will be tweaked in time, but at the moment, as you can see, that is a bit of an issue. So, if we look at some of the images, we've got Madderfoot Bridge, which is 30.56 microgram per litre with zinc 5.83, and for example, the bottom one, Steeple Court Stream, 19.61 with EQS with zinc levels of 15.67. Something I've realised by sort of going out and researching this area is actually making me realise how lucky we are to live around this area and how nice the rivers actually are. Like, you don't know that half the places exist until you actually go on Google Street View and look at some of the places. And the river Itchen from this model, as you can see, we're getting slightly lower zinc EQSs, but the river is meeting the EQS at all these sites also. And once again, we have arcing sites which are above the estuarine EQS of 7.9 micrograms per litre. So, if we look, and these are results from the river test and Bartley water, and once again, we are sort of seeing very similar concentrations where all the estuaries, all the river sites, all freshwater river sites, are once again meeting the freshwater EQS, and potentially when they reach the estuarine environment will fail the marine EQS. And with this model, this is a UK-based model that I've used to predict this, and there's actually currently quite a few other models in other countries that do the same thing. So we've got a Dutch version and an American version, and to complicate things further, these models seem to predict varying results for the same conditions. So in this study, I do want to try and test out some of the other models and see how much we can get to vary for the handball. This model is a model called GEMCO, and this model predicts pollutants into the estuarine environment. and this was developed by Seafic and Delta Areas also. And this model is another simple bottom model which can be adapted for each estuary that you want it to be adapted for. So yeah, the image at the bottom, the figure at the bottom shows sort of the schematic plan, what the model looks, what goes into the model. So we've got the river input, we've got atmospheric deposition, so anything in the air which pulls it into the estuary. We've got direct emissions at 3 different sites, and then you've got emissions from the sea, and you put these in with other parameters such as salinity, temperature, pH, etc., and you get an output for the model. And if we look at this model, we're predicting total dissolved zinc concentrations of 18.7 microgram per litre for areas of high boat density, and the levels we're seeing in this area are around 19 to 20 microgram per litre. So we see this model is predicting levels very similar to what we're seeing in the estuary environment. So this confirms to us that we put in, the graph we saw earlier, we've got tonnes per year of zinc, all those inputs are being put into this model, so therefore we can see that this model is clarifying to us that zinc anodes are likely to be the main source of zinc to the Hampshire estuary environment, and that sort of supports what we're seeing in the estuary, what we've worked out from our study, and then this model is supporting that, which is good to see. And then if the model also gives you, not only gives you the line graph you've just seen, it gives you like a schematic plan of the estuary, and as you can see from that, it shows that the high level pollution are in the upper to middle of the estuary, which is what we're seeing in the estuary environment. The final model, which hasn't actually been used in this study, is called the visual maintain model, and in this model it's very similar to the other models, where you put in parameters again and it calculates the different speciation of metals for you. This is something that, as I said, hasn't been done yet, and Hamburg is saying it will be done. Sorry that we've got so many models in one order, I agree it's quite a few to go through. But once again, so that is all the modelling out the way now. Is Southampton water polluted then? So if we look at the BLM model for the freshwater environment, it's showing us that the freshwater environment isn't actually technically polluted, but then the marine environment is. So therefore there's a bit of a discrepancy there. But Southampton water is polluted if we look at the levels we're seeing, but it's not significantly polluted, therefore it's nothing that we've got to be significantly concerned about at this current time. And it's also worth noting that the EQS was lowered from 40 microgram per litre to 7.9 grams per litre like 5-10 years ago, so therefore maybe we're being a bit too ambitious at the current time. And as we also saw, there are localised pollution sources within the Hampshire, etc., and also in many other estuaries. So what can we do about this? Well, for anode use, we can educate boat owners. Boat owners showed a lack of knowledge in some cases with anode use, so therefore if we educate them about good anode practice, that can help limit the amount of zinc coming from anodes. And also in some environments, such as the Upper Hampshire, we can encourage them to use aluminium anodes, and this will help to limit the amount of zinc being released. Also, from a microplastic point of view, there being a metal vector, if we educate people about plastic use, I know we were talking about that before the talk, if we educate people and get them to stop dropping the waste in the first place, then we can sort of limit that source, and that will help stop the transport of microplastics and other plastic items. And also continue to work with the industry. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the emissions that were coming out of industry were significantly higher than what we're seeing today. I know that's partly due to the fact that we have less industry in the country now, but it also due to the fact that the industries that are still here have been made to clean up their act. Therefore, the pollution level we're seeing are significantly lower than what we have historically seen. So to conclude, yes, Southampton water is polluted, but not too alarmingly. Anodes are by far the largest source of zinc to the Hampshire estuary environment, but other sources such as sewage works will also have a part. Microplastics are also a pollution source common in Southampton water, and the local freshwater EQS is met for zinc, while the estuarine one of 7.9 microgram per litre isn't met, and we're questioning how reliable this really is. And as we've seen from the models, the Manpack model and the Sadic model were predicting too low for anodes, but the GEMCO model, which has all the sources into estuary, was predicting good levels, which were very similar to what we were observing in the estuary. So, thank you all for listening. Any questions? 2F model is something that the BLM model is something that is actually at the moment being tweaked quite a lot. Therefore, I think in the near future it will be. And also, with the environmental quality standard for the marine environment, it's an EU set thing. So therefore, we're restricted to what the EU has. So potentially that might all change anyway. Hopefully not. But with that, we're seeing a more of a rigid one. We've done take into account background levels, and it's something that's being questioned. So therefore, you might find that you input the background level for a certain estuary, and then you're allowed a tolerance above that. Therefore, we might find that it becomes more rigid for each estuary environment, like the freshwater one. So yeah, I think it's something that will be, and the river authorities are quite keen on adjusting this at the moment. Like our agency do sort of, they don't like having all their results above the line, but you can only record what the estuaries are showing. So
yeah, that's what was quite interesting is the way the data are collected. I mean, is there a particular period in the year, like based on the season?
The zinc concentrations, yeah.
Yes, and as well for the sediment, you got a particular depth.
Yeah. Okay. So the data you saw is actually average data from all seasonally, but you do see a bit of variation. So in the handball, you see that the sample collected in January, May, October, and June, so from 2015 through to 2016, so in June, October, January, May, so that's how it went. And in June, you see a slightly bigger peak in the zinc concentration due to the fact there are more boats in the water, so that we expect from alluvium being a major source. And then in the winter, you also see a slightly bigger peak. That is due to the fact on the handball, the boats, in fact there's so many boats in handball, most of them are still in the water in the winter, so therefore you're still getting that contribution, and you're also getting high peak in the winter, that is when that's likely when the sewage works inputting more, so therefore you're getting high peak then. And in sediments, in fact the sediments are mainly historic sediments, which the metal contaminants are there, there's not so much variation, but in the winter months, in the summer months, you are getting a slightly higher level in the sediments again. And that is due to the fact that there's more settling to it. In the winter, of course, it's being disturbed more.
Okay. Is there any also link with like underground water river? That may modify the
on the handball as such, I don't think there is, but of course in other areas where you've got I suppose we are in like limestone areas here, so potentially, but I think from what I've seen is where you do have underground rivers, the metal levels are generally low in those areas. So I'm not sure that would have that much of an impact.
Well, I'm thinking the flow of those underground, I don't know whether there is, so that's what we're looking to check, but if there's a change in the flow across the season, you may have a result that actually might be affected by that.
Yeah, agreed. That's certainly worth looking into actually. Yeah, because around here we might have some of them, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Aldous, what harm does zinc do in the marine environment?
Well, it's one of those things that the level we're talking about isn't really an issue, but in adverse levels, so some of the really high levels, it can sort of cause like impersex, so it means that some marine species can't reproduce, and also I think it can cause mutations, but the level we're generally seeing wouldn't do that, but I think it's just more precautionary to keep them low, but no, in very extreme conditions, so like for example at horse ash, it could cause, like, I know there's big studies done on TBT on different mussels and them causing impersex, so very high levels of zinc can also cause, I think, similar sort of things.
Many years ago, when TBT was in hull paints, in the paints for the hulls of ships, and it was very effective.
Actually. No, it was very effective.
It did its job, and there was a lot of resistance from the marine environment and also the paint manufacturers to remove the TBT from paint. And I don't think they found as good a replacement.
They haven't. No.
That's something which. So I think if you were proposing change, and I can only talk about the marine environment, not the river.
I know more about the marine. So.
It would be a painful and slow process, but not. I don't think you'd be absolute resistance. Because I think the International Maritime Organisation, I do a lot of work with them, they are listening and they are concerned and they are moving forward. They have made big steps forward. But it's interesting. The process that you've gone through can no doubt be used for any.
Yeah, the concept can be applied for other estuaries,
or any other metal, or any other
can be,
pollutant.
Yeah, like the models can be and stuff. So, but going back to that, we're not trying to stop people using zinc anodes. That's not what the project's about. But that is something that also comes to light, is how much is coming from them. But
I think it's very valid. It's
it's
knowledge that's
definitely. But then I don't want to upset all the boat owners by saying, oh, you can't use zinc anodes. That's not what we're trying to do. But it's surprising how much is coming from them. And going back to what you were saying about the anti-fouling paint, when we did the survey, boat owners often, a lot of the comments in the survey were boat owners complaining about how, well, anode paint 20 years ago used to work. Now it doesn't. And then the harbour board, when I was talking to the harbour board, he said his boat on Hamble used to be have no barnacles or no weed on it when he took it out, and now it takes out the same period and it's actually covered in it. So yeah, anti-fouling paints are becoming a lot less effective, and that is due to the fact that they've been made to learn the metal levels in them, and of course that is having a major impact on it actually being effective. So it's a difficult one, isn't it, where you've got the compromise of having stuff that's actually effective or protecting the environment. So it's one of those balances that are hard to reach.
But there's a lot of research going into how you prevent hull fouling. There's a lot of
the self-polished paint, etc. Yeah.
I remember sailing in Greece one year and going into one port where they were really hot fishing, and they had a lot of fish without eyes. I couldn't say what the pollutant was.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in the sampling methodology and the testing, because currently we have a discharge consent into a pond that, into the estuary of the Hamble at Warsash, and we test monthly, and we have a third party who does our testing. But the Environment Agency also does tests generally on a monthly basis, and quite often we find that the results are fairly widely, and we're fairly sure that our methodology is fairly correct, and as I say, because we've got experienced testers doing it. But I do wonder why we're getting such differences.
I think, like in this here, the water sample collected with everything being acid washed first, so like it's a 10% hydrochloric acid bath with 90% military water, so that you just make sure everything's really clean. And then just we have a water sampler which has a thing and it clips down, or in some cases a bottle. So therefore, as long as everything's clean, it should be. But even in this study, you do see results do vary significantly. And if I'm right in thinking where you think you are, the pond on the university campus, is it? Yeah. Well, that is just where you have the very high metal levels that I showed you. So therefore, and I think the sediments have not only been dumped on the foreshore, it's spread back up on the Lurk campus. So therefore, I think the level will vary depending on how much rain is washing stuff in. Because it's likely that not only will be metals, there will be other things being washed out. And also, I think I've looked at the environmental thing there, they don't actually test metals as such, I don't think, do they?
No, it's VLD, suspended solids, hydrocarbons.
So it's likely that if you did test for metals there, you would be getting very high levels, because I sat off the pier and to do what I thought was going to be a nice cross-time study of the water coming past having been raised from the anodes on the boats. But what I got instead was very, very high zinc levels due to the fact that at high tide, all the sediments are being washed into the river, so therefore it's raising the metal levels in the water column there.
We think that one of the problems is the pond where we're testing. It's tidal, so we're getting that flow in from the sun. We actually suspect that it's not our output at all that's causing it.
No, it's probably not. You'll probably find that you're getting the stuff coming in from the Solent. Also, those sediment beds there are so polluted from that foundry that all the water coming in is going to be coming over that foundry and then disturbing the sediment. So, because I was there. I used to get the boat from Toby down there, and I think he was complaining about that and saying, "Well, this is."
What's she testing equipment? Is it the stuff that Paul Wright's got?
So all the equipment has come from that laboratory. So or been purchased for the project, but most of the stuff is. So whatever
university stuff.
So like the probes, the sediment grabs, and the water samples are all from the university. So it's probably similar stuff to what the Environment Agency or whoever does something there uses.
Great.
Just a
quick question with regard, is there any absorption of the zinc by organism, like bacteria? Because we start to see that on pollution side with plastic, where there is bacteria that start to digest.
Yep.
And I'm thinking if you are in the water and you have the bacteria that have, you may have less apparent zinc because actually you have an environment that have adapted to that. Well, if you're on the ground, you may not have those bacteria. I don't know.
Yeah, so DOC, which is dissolved organic carbon, that is like organic fibres. So they're things such as leaf matter and just other things like that. They dissolve, or not dissolve, but they absorb zinc to them. Okay. And then the labile zinc, which was the other line in the graph, that is the zinc that's still available in the water column without the stuff that isn't absorbed to the organic matter. And total dissolved zinc is where with acid and heating up to high temperatures, that has broken down all the bond between those chemicals and creates total dissolved zinc, which is what we were looking at. So yes, it does, but what we're looking at is the total dissolved zinc. Going back to the methodology thing, it's something that I could have mentioned some of, but I didn't want to add too much of that in.
Another thing to mention about cadmium, because I just want, in the 50s, the government, the drops on the cadmium over Wiltshire and the south of England. So, could that be a reason why you had an increase just locally of that?
Yeah, it could potentially be, but I wouldn't like to go and say that was actually the case. But the level we're seeing with cadmium, they're quite consistent in other estuaries also. Oh, okay. Therefore, I think it's more the fact that there is actually more background cadmium in a lot of places than people expect. So, yeah. And also, like I said, anodes are a minor source of that.
Aldous, you had some of the models that you used.
Yes.
Predicted levels which vary significantly. Can I use that word?
No,
from your actual samples.
Yes.
And I assume that they are proprietary packages. The models. Are the owners of the models aware that their models are not as accurate? I'm sure that they would be interested in that.
Not at the moment, but with the Manpack model, that was actually designed for biocide from paint, so it's copper and coming out of anti-fouling paint. Therefore, for them, it is actually accurate. So adapting from anode is only possible, but at the moment it hasn't been done that much. So therefore, the results aren't questionable as such, but it's exactly the same process, but it is going to be lower. And also with the model is based, that model you're talking about is based on enclosed marinas and semi-closed and open marinas. So enclosed marinas are things such as Southampton, Ocean Village, where you've got a very small entrance, but on the handball, they're all semi-enclosed open marinas. Therefore, for the model, I can't tell them that they're enclosed marinas. Therefore, it only counts. So if I'm modelling an estuary or marina that has 20 or say 100 boats in it, and then there's another marina, which is an open marina just upstream, or just next to it, that has another 150 boats in it, it's not taking into account the thing from that one, which is washing down through the estuary. So therefore, what I'm going to try and do in the future, I want to try and do it where I model that whole upper part of the handball as one big estuary, one big marina, and see if that does give me the similar zinc levels, because then you're taking into account all the boats on the other marinas nearby, which are having input and raising the concentrations in that area.
There's certainly scope, though, isn't there, for an academic paper?
No, definitely.
To explain the benefits and disbenefits of each model for
I think that's something that we will try and do. And, at the moment, the paper that's been in review for a long time, the journal's useless. I won't give names, but they had it for over 6 months. They've had so many times, we'll send it out to a reviewer. So at the moment, there's a lot of papers that we have got to write, which can actually done a share.
Just again, another question. You mentioned about you're going to develop your own model.
Own model?
Yeah, is that what you said?
I'm going to use the same model, but I'm going to, instead of using for individual marinas like I've currently done, I'm going to make it so that the top of the handball is just one big marina. Okay. I'm afraid I haven't got the modelling skills to produce my own model.
But it's not as though you don't know people who have.
I know, yeah.
But have you thought, for example, of using all the different models to create like a compound model, looking at which proportion of each model you could use in order to see how you reproduce your own results?
Yeah, that's something we could do. And Yeah, and the GEMCO model sort of does do that a bit more, so that models more the individual pollutants. So what we need a model which does what all the models do. But at the moment you are limited what is out there, and also saying that, I should add also, these models are, like, if we wanted to, I could get other ones, but these models are some better ones out there, but these are all free downloadable ones online, so anyone can go, apart from the B&M one, anyone can download these models online, so, yeah.
If there's no other questions, I think I'd say thank you very, very much.